Hey, welcome to my first A-Push review video. Today we'll be talking about the transformation of the West and the implications that it brought. The West was seen as a land of opportunity, as described by Frederick Jackson Turner, and it allowed many Americans to get rich, but it used a lot of forced labor and migrant labor in the process. The West was an incredibly geographically diverse region. The U.S. government used war and treaties to get land from the Native Americans that lived there, and it played a large role in the development and regulation of the region. One example of this was in the 20th century, where federally financed irrigation systems and dams expanded access to commercial farming. The population in the West boomed, with state governments eager to get their populations up and railroad companies eager to make more money off the land. Ways of life also changed due to the move to the West. Men focused on growing cash crops, so women were left to care for animals, grow food crops, and cooking and cleaning. Many also suffered from loneliness due to the isolation in the West. John Wesley Powell, a dude who surveyed the Middle Border, warned that only communal farming could succeed in the region because of the need of large-scale irrigation. During this period, huge bonanza farms were seen to spring up in the area, but family farms remained predominant. These smaller farmers were dependent on loans for capital, and they received products from the industrial East, and they were very sensitive to price fluctuations in the market, which shows the process of globalization during this period. Now, the future of Western farming was seen in giant agricultural enterprises, seen in California, where the Southern Pacific Railroad and other large companies had huge fruit and vegetable farms worked by migrant workers. These companies had the capital that allowed them to invest in new technologies and large-scale irrigation projects. The journalist Henry George urged governments to take action against this so-called land monopoly in 1871. This period also saw the rise of the romanticized image of the cowboy. The Kansas Pacific Railroad stations became destinations for huge cattle drives by cowboys, which ended in the mid-1880s, as farmers started using more barbed wire fences and terrible winters destroyed millions of cattle. The industry reorganized as large enclosed ranches. San Francisco quickly developed as the economic hub of California. In Southern California, development started in the 1880s with tourism, then oil in Los Angeles discovered in 1892, and the commercialization of lumber, which was followed by discovery of iron ore and copper in Michigan, gold and silver in California, Nevada, and Colorado. A lot of large companies made this possible as they mobilized investment from Eastern and European sources. Gold and silver rushes were seen in North and South Dakota in 1876, in Idaho in 1883, and Alaska later on. However, after the 1848 gold rush in California, a lot of the mining became corporate. This highlights an overall trend that we're going to see with the development of the West, especially in California in the beginning. The largely individualized family-type farming and industry is going to be replaced by larger commercial kind of corporations and industries that will be able to invest and draw investment to create large enterprises. The other important development as we see the United States expand into the West is the subjugation of Plains Indians. Now, the introduction of horses in the 18th century to the region changed the way of life of Indians there, and persistent warfare between old tribes and newcomers consistently raged on in the area, promoting instability. Most migrants to the West before the Civil War maintained peaceful relations with Native Americans there. However, after the war, conflicts between the army and natives proliferated. In 1869, President Grant announced a peace policy, but it didn't last long, and soon after, Civil War generals were using the strategies of attrition seen in the Civil War to defeat the Native Americans, destroying food supplies and killing off buffalo populations in the millions. Now, in 1877, the former Freedmen's Bureau Commissioner, O.O. Howard, pursued the Nez Perce Indians after fights in Oregon and Idaho, who tried to get to Canada but were forced to reservations in Oklahoma. The leader of the Nez Perce tribe, Chief Joseph, delivered a powerful speech in Washington to an audience including President Hayes in 1879. He adopted a language of freedom and equal rights that was developed during the Civil War and the abolition movement. Unfortunately, Chief Joseph's message wasn't as effective as he hoped it would be. The Nez Perce tribe was just transported to another reservation in Washington Territory, not their homeland in Oregon. The Plains Indians did have some successes against the United States troops, though. In 1876, at Little Bighorn, General George A. Custer and his 250-man battalion was killed by Sioux and Cheyenne warriors defending land reserved in an 1868 treaty for as long as the grass shall grow. The land was invaded because of gold. But at the end of the day, in a mere few decades, 8 new states were admitted into the Union, including Nebraska, Colorado, North and South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming. Railroads, farmers, and cattlemen started to occupy areas, and Plains tribes were concentrated in reservations. The root of this conflict between the United States and natives in the region was due to the Indian ideals of freedom, which included maintaining their own culture and political autonomy and control of ancestral land, which was really reasonable, but it conflicted with railroad companies and Republican interests. They believed that Indians should change to the American way of life. And in 1871, Congress eliminated a treaty system that had been in place for over 100 years, stopping the recognition of tribes as independent nations. They established a Bureau of Indian Affairs that created boarding schools that tried to eliminate native culture. But perhaps the final nail in the coffin for natives in the region was the Dawes Act, passed in 1887, headed by Senator Henry L. Dawes from Massachusetts, which broke up nearly all tribes into small parcels to give to Indians, while the rest was auctioned off to white purchasers. This led to land rushes in the 1890s, and Indians quickly lost 86 of the 138 million acres that they had in merely half a century. One of the greatest insults to natives in the area was outlined in the Supreme Court case Elk v. Wilkins, which essentially defined the 14th and 15th Amendments don't apply to Native Americans. They questioned their civility. Even a guy, John Elk, who had left his tribe and lived among white settlers in Nebraska, was deemed as uncivilized. By 1900, about 53,000 Indians had become citizens by accepting land in the Dawes Act, and Congress granted citizenship to 100,000 residents of the Indian Territory in modern-day Oklahoma. But the rest of Native Americans had to wait until 1924 to receive even citizenship status. Ghost Dance, a religious revitalization campaign, foretold a day when life would return to the same as before for Native Americans. Many Native Americans gathered for days of singing, dancing, and religious observances. However, the U.S. federal government, fearing a possible rebellion, sent troops to reservations, and in 1890, soldiers opened fire near Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, killing between 150 to 200 natives, mostly women and children. The issue of governments suppressing native culture spanned beyond the U.S.'s borders. Settler societies in Argentina, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand were all also notorious for doing this. The Aborigine population in Australia removed children from families to be adopted by white families. That policy was only abandoned in the 1970s. The Prime Minister officially apologized in 2008, calling the day Sorry Day, something you expect to hear in Canada. Today we talked about how the Western economy shifted from a small-scale individual production from many individuals to a large-scale production from few, namely corporations. This was facilitated by the discovery of many natural resources, which were quickly exploited. We also talked about the expansion into the West at natives' expense, particularly the Plains natives. I hope you enjoyed the video and found the information presented useful for your U.S. history studies. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe to GaoinatorStudios for more content. Thanks for watching.